Hello, Starshine. My name is Liz, and this is my channel, Simsational Stories. If you have not seen my videos before, and you enjoy this one, please like and subscribe, and maybe check out my other social media as well. I'm on both Facebook and Twitter. All relevant links are in the description below, and of course, if you're a Sims player and you'd like to download any of my characters, just search the hashtag Simsational Stories on the Sims 4 gallery. All original content is created by This Is Not Eric. Finally, before I begin my Simsational story, I'd like to issue this blanket content and trigger warning. The following story is just Sims, hey. I'm not going to apologise for treating them terribly, if that's what I've done. But I do want to assure you now that although I mean absolutely no harm, I completely understand if you feel unable to consume my content. Many loves, and we will catch each other on the internet elsewhere. Okay, so now we've gotten that over with. Let's go. Today's story is from Kalthis & Co., and we're at chapter 16. If you have not seen previous chapters and would like to catch up, there are playlists available on my channel so you can hear the entire story in chronological order. The rest of us are going to move on from where we left off last time though. So without further ado. Kellyanne Kalthis was 32 years old and pregnant for the 6th time in her life. She had never actually wanted children, but things happen. She had only been 18 the first time when, fresh-faced and new to the city, she had fallen in love with a man that, unbeknownst to her, was already married. It had been wonderful at first, but before she knew it, she was left pregnant and alone. That had been how she got her eldest daughter, Kelsey. Next had come dark-haired Kevin, son of Julian, the only man she'd ever given her whole heart to. Julian had died while she was pregnant with Kevin, though, and that had incited a deep depression, during which Kellyanne had really began to drink. Unfortunately, Kelsey was left to pick up the slack, taking care of her younger siblings almost her entire life. Kellyanne had partied so hard back in those days that she hadn't even known whom her next son Keith's father was at the time, although it was pretty obvious now who he took after. But even knowing that, Nicholas had still taken them all on, for a little while anyway. She had later been left pregnant with Carissa at the altar by him though. Last of all her current children was baby Kaylee, daughter of her former landlord, Gino Grubb. It was a lot to take in. Kellyanne knew that. Her 5 children, all of whom had different fathers, had ultimately been too much even for her to handle, and 6 or 7 months ago now, after a fight with Kelsey, she had left them behind to fend for themselves. They had the apartment. Kaylee's father provided them with that at least, but otherwise, Kelsey and her younger siblings were now on their own. Kellyanne had never really wanted to have kids. She actually hated children, and although she knew that abandoning them was wrong in so many ways, she also justified her actions to herself by reminding herself of how rude and cruel Kelsey, and all her children really, had been to her recently, when she had tried to go home to them after a fight with her now fiancé, Kyle. Red-haired and hot-headed Kyle Harris, professional criminal and Kellyanne Kalthis's new fiancé, was a member of the local crime syndicate and very successful. But he was also rather impulsive and quite mean when drunk. He'd even been violent towards her once, which was when she tried to go home to her children. But they'd resolved that now. Kellyanne loved Kyle, but she really didn't want to be having his baby. She didn't want to be having anyone's baby. She had left her 5 other children behind for a reason. Kellyanne felt trapped. She had originally loved living with Kyle in his luxurious, fancy, modern apartment far across town from the dingy dump Kaylee's father grudgingly provided the family with in lieu of actual parental involvement. Kyle's place was leagues above anything she'd ever experienced in her life. He had 2 bathrooms, for heaven's sake. Kellyanne had been poor her whole life, but now she could afford to ring a repairman when her washing machine broke. And this was how Kellyanne Kalthis met Darnell Paris. She was 5 months pregnant with Kyle's child, and the washing machine broke. So, of course, she called the repair service, and they sent their best technician over to sort it out. Kellyanne was not drunk exactly that day, but she had certainly had a couple by then. It was already 4 in the afternoon, and she could tell that the repair guy was attracted to her. It made her feel good, sexy even. Darnell Paris was not a rich man like Kyle, nor was he really the company's best technician. He was barely even qualified. He lived in the slums of Evergreen Harbour, in a house that had probably been condemned, and he was an absolute raging alcoholic. He had been quite the ladies' man when he was younger, though, and he still had a fair amount of charm about him when he was in a good mood. Darnell was in a good mood that day. The job had been easy, it was only a loose wire, and this chick seemed pretty cool. She obviously had coin. Just look at the place. And they had chemistry. He could tell. She was into him. He didn't question it for a moment. Why an obviously kept woman like that would be interested in a bum like him. His confidence was probably what turned her on. He asked if she'd like to come over later that day. Kellyanne didn't know why she said yes. Driving up to the place in the very nice Prius that Kyle had leased for her, she thought to herself that she must be mad. What was she doing? Going off to the ghetto to meet some strange repairman she'd only just met? And for what? Why was she going over there? She could not give herself a suitable answer, and yet she got out of the car anyway. She couldn't give Kyle a suitable answer either when he messaged to ask where in the heck she and his dinner were. She shot off a quick lie via text, something about her children having called her, and then quickly turned her phone off. She didn't know what she was doing. If Kyle found out where she really was, well, she didn't want to think about it. But she also didn't want to leave. At least, not yet. She hadn't explicitly told Darnell that she was a taken woman, but he had to have known before now, because he did nothing but smile knowingly as she texted away her excuses. He had then poured them both a stiff drink before telling her to follow him to his bedroom. They'd better get to it if she wanted to get home to her husband in time for him to believe her. Kellyanne was shocked he had the audacity to actually say it, but she had to admit to herself that he was right. She knew what she'd come here for, and so did Darnell. What point was there in pretending there was anything else going on? They had wanted each other from the moment they'd met. It wasn't personal. They'd barely even had a conversation. But that was the whole thing. Kellyanne Kalthis didn't want someone to have a conversation with. She wanted someone to distract herself with. Distract herself? She did. 5 months pregnant to another man, her fiancé, no less. Kellyanne spent almost 2 hours with repairman Darnell Paris in his bed at his house the very first day they met. He was by far the best she'd ever had, and that was saying a lot. Kellyanne was no innocent teenager. She'd been around the block before, but never like this. Darnell had fallen asleep after they had finally finished, but she couldn't rest. What had she done? And how would she ever get away with it? She had to get home. Coming in the front door, only to be instantly confronted by an angry, drunken Kyle, Kellyanne felt that he must instantly know what she'd done. Surely it was written all over her face. And not just her face. Kellyanne was sore. She was careful to walk normally, though, and to try to keep her cool, no matter how guilty she felt. She explained to Kyle that Kevin had texted her, Kelsey was at her boyfriend's, and Carissa had been vomiting. And the poor boy just hadn't known what to do. Kyle barely let her get the words out before losing his cool. He didn't care what was going on with those brats. They weren't his children or problem, and they shouldn't be hers anymore either. Would she do this same thing in the future when their baby finally got here? Abandon his family and home to go look after problems somewhere else? Kellyanne couldn't believe it. He had believed her story. That should have been a good thing. He had no idea that she'd cheated on him. But he was so drunk and so furious. She found herself pleading with him to please forgive her. She hadn't meant it. It was just the pregnancy hormones making her respond like a mother. Kyle demanded that she promise to never speak to her 5 older children again, let alone go see them. And she agreed to his demands to keep the peace and her salacious secret to herself. Things sort of went back to normal after that. Kellyanne was so grateful that she had gotten away with her little escapade that she took Kyle's sulky, silent treatment as meekly as a mouse, and that placated him somewhat. He was a strange and controlling man who simultaneously treated Kellyanne like a precious jewel and a misbehaving child at the same time, depending on both his mood and her recent behaviour. Kyle had never planned to be in this situation. He had been raised by his elderly grandmother, whose passing away early in his life had instigated a chain of events that had led him to a life of crime. He had once been homeless and was now successful. Things with Kellyanne had just sort of happened to him as much as they had just sort of happened to her. And although he knew he hadn't always treated her right, he did love her in his own weird, twisted way. Kyle wanted to make sure that she knew that too. Despite all their recent differences, Kellyanne was his queen and he loved her. She had been distant lately, and he had been busy because of his latest heist. And then there was that whole business with her disappearing to go see her other children. They needed to reconnect. Kyle surprised Kellyanne with a beautiful new necklace and an invitation to dinner. The restaurant was beautiful and very expensive. Kyle knew that he had done the right thing. It was the perfect way to brush their recent issues and fight under the carpet, to move on from all that drama and get ready for the birth of their first child together. Kellyanne was starting to cotton onto the cycle by now and awkwardly played her part because she could tell it was important to Kyle. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 16 of Kellyanne, Kalthis & Co. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can tune in soon to hear the next chapter. And hey, maybe think about sharing my channel with a friend. Or don't. It's your life. Anyway, bye!